professional dropouts. Dropouts from middle-class ideology, success ideology. Pay our actors $5 a performance. You can live on $25 a week. That's assuming you're doing something you're interested in and something that's valuable. If you're not doing anything that's interesting, then you got to get a lot of money, Mac. You got to make a fortune to keep a boring job or to support a war in Vietnam that's evil, that's murderous. So we struggle in our own humble way to destroy the United States.
The truth of the matter is not everybody became a hippie instantly in the 60s. In fact, if you went around and counted heads, we'd probably find that the number of young people in America in the 60s with long hair and counterculture true values were very, very, very few. But their impact was extraordinary. What happened? Well, they did get an awful lot of media attention. They were very, very visible on the streets, and they were the forerunners, the town criers, if you will, of some ideas and some values and some new kinds of lifestyles that hit very responsive chords.
The American dream is peace, love.
Brotherhood, kindness, you know, equality.
You know, I love my neighbor more than myself, and that's their whole philosophy.
I agree with you. It's beautiful, but you and I can't live that way. You can't take off your dress.
You know why we can't live that way?
earrings.
Because
Why?
we've had our college education, we have mother and father back home.
Right, and we're used to the martinis at 5 o'clock
That's
every
right.
afternoon, and the wine and the whole works.
There are certain things that we have to do that society expects
of us, and we do it. But secretly,
Yes, God damn it, we do it.
If you had a choice, you and I would both be down there.
The change for me, once I made up my mind, once I decided that the people who were protesting the war and the hippies were right, was overnight. And I remember boxing up my pillbox hats and my white gloves and taking down a big box of things down to the Goodwill and dumping them. I picked up some good hippie clothes at the Salvation Army or one of the thrift shops, and I just dumped one set of values and embraced another.
With startling speed, the American landscape was changing. Almost every city and town in the country had its own little version of the hate. And almost every middle-class family in America had a son, a daughter, a cousin, or a niece who was saying no thanks to the American dream by catching a ride with the hippie movement.
I remember when our son called one day and said that he was going to leave college. And we just wanted him to stay in college so much because we really felt like that his future would be so enhanced with a college education. And I said the wrong thing. I said, hey, this is our investment too. You see, a child isn't an investment. But that word, investment, has haunted me because I was immediately told, well, I'm not an investment, and he was right. And he left college, and we didn't even know where he went.
Tens of thousands of would-be college students were dropping out, or taking longer and longer to finish school, or switching from career-oriented majors to pursue more esoteric studies like philosophy. Many were questioning the whole idea of formal education.
I've learned so much more from going to the drugstore cafe and just talking to people than I ever learned in college or high school, because I think knowledge can be gained much more from contact with people than from books. People just go in and order coffee and sit down and rap and talk to each other and learn. The problem is, though, now that they've started charging a 50-cent minimum after 6 o'clock in the afternoon, it is kind of a hassle because sometimes you don't have 50 cents.
One of the values of the counterculture was to live free. You should live as cheaply as possible because money was evil. Many of the homes in the hippie districts in cities were flop houses. You would let anybody who hitchhiked through, as long as they looked all right, you'd let them stay. Some people stayed 2, 3, 4 nights a week. It was part of the idea. You lived off your brothers, be one another. Come on, people, love one another.
I think the sense that pervaded everything was the sense, I can afford to give up the traditional values. This is a new age. I can be a flower child and do drugs and eat, and everything will be okay, and forget about taking care of your body or working or getting up in the morning or going to bed at night or discharging any responsibilities. Forget about that, because we have built a society of plenty and of comfort and of ease, and there will always be, and our parents are always going to be showering gifts upon us, so what the hell? Let's have a good time.
What joy is there in life? Life is and should be ecstasy. Being alive should be a joy, and it's a drag for most people because they never had a chance to figure it out for themselves what they wanted to do.
My son knocked around the country for a while, and he had a friend who had become a hippie. My son didn't, by the way, but he was out in California. He went to this hippie camp where just to see his friend. And what those kids were really living on is that a couple of them had gotten jobs in a local grocery store, and what they were doing was segregating a certain amount of vegetables and stuff like that and slipping it out the back door to their fellow hippies. They really hadn't dropped out of society. They'd become parasitic in society.
Revolutionary culture is a powerful revolutionary weapon in the broad masses of the people. It prepares the ground ideologically before the revolution comes, and is an important, indeed essential, fighting front in the general revolutionary front during the revolution. Got any spare change?
We had a whole bunch of psychedelic liquid lights. Remember in those days, rock and roll, you know, with the mirrors. And we do light shows for different groups around, like we did little bands in Taos and in Santa Fe and stuff like that. So we made more or less a living. But as for the real fact of how we lived was food stamps. I'm not lying to you, but food stamps.
How was one supposed to judge the act of conning food stamps? As a way of living cheaply? As a revolutionary act of redistributing the wealth? Or theft, plain and simple? To mainstream America, the meaning was clear.
You sound like you're kind of worked up about this hippie question.
I do have a slight aversion for them. I really do. I mean, here I am. I have to work for a living. I mean, I get here every day, and I work. They walk the streets and they steal off from me.
That's not true, brother.
And
I was in the Air Force.
I can't see that.
Right to be
I really
free.
can't.
Come on, let's hear about it.
And they go for this peace, love, not hate. If it had been for my father, your father, and his father, and everybody's father, over there fighting for us, there wouldn't be any hippies here now. Am I not right?
I think it was just do what you want to do whenever you want to do it. You can't have a society like that. I mean, who's going to work? Who's going to grow the food? Who's going to make the autos? Who's going to? It was totally unrealistic to me, and to anybody I think who was a blue-collar worker at the time, or working in industry at the time. It's totally unrealistic.
They wouldn't wait on me in the store. You know, I think they thought maybe I might be ripping them off, or I'd drive other customers away, or I remember once trying to rent a place in North Beach, and the door was slammed in my face, and that didn't feel good. I think I was pretty innocent, you know. Now I can see why.
More and more Americans were slamming their doors on these cultural rebels because they were rejecting the very principles upon which American society had been built. One group above all came to symbolize this rejection: those who dropped out and went back to the land.
The whole gesture, you know, of dropping out, of living poor, of dressing in a funky way, of letting your hair grow long, of pursuing the arts, or dope, which incidentally all the romantic artists were into. All of those things are a protest against something more than immediate issues of social justice, immediate issues of politics. They are asking deep questions of an urban and industrial order. It is not by any means fortuitous that what we have in the way of an environmental movement, of an ecology movement, a sense of our connection, our obligations to nature, comes out of the period we're talking about. And that is represents a very deep criticism of urban industrial culture.
A Gallup poll found that over 3.5 million people experimented with communal life.
We're breaking away from the standard American syndrome of use up as much as you possibly can. It's a very Tolstoyan kind of thing of what does a man need, you know? Not very much, really.
It was to have an entire relationship to the earth and to God. And that's what made them feel good. Now, what happened is that it was hard. They got hepatitis because the flies went into the outhouse and then went over and sat on the food, and they didn't know about that, and it was hard to bathe, and the babies were screaming all the time, and it was freezing cold, and it was difficult for people to start out like that. So in that sense, it didn't work because it was too hard.
Millions more did not seek refuge in the country, but did question ever more deeply their participation in a society which they now believed was doing just about everything wrong.
The message in the music began to change drastically. We began to talk about what was happening to us as people, as artists, as performers, as viewers of the society within which we were operating. We began to talk about the Vietnam War. We began to flip out our record companies and our managers who said, wait a second, you know, come on, let's get happy again here. You know, no one's going to buy these records, you know. You're talking about deep stuff here. This is not going to sell. Well, we didn't care.
We will not let them separate our culture from our politics. We are a people. We are all together. We are all under attack. America has decided to devour its youth. We will resist. We will not participate in America's Children for Breakfast program. Fuck 'em!
Such inflammatory remarks by public figures made millions of Americans feel all this craziness was being provoked by leaders. Leaders who were in place to take millions of young rebels on an explosive, anarchistic rampage.
Now, in terms of the leaders, so-called leaders I met, Abbie Hoffman, yes, Abbie Hoffman was an inspiration, but he was not a leader. And I don't know anybody who would suggest that he was. The only people who suggested he was were Newsweek and Time and Richard Nixon.
Well, hippies are a myth. See, hippies were created by the press. I mean, it was created from outside. It was a thing masked by the media, right? A love thing, a white thing, like the Spade said. It's a white thing. I'm not a hippie. Hippies are fags. Sorry about that. I don't think they know how to love.
I don't agree with you. He was on my television show. Now, Abbie Hoffman was a man who could contradict himself within seconds. That was part of it, because he never said that there was an ideology.
And I have no program on what to do.
I think it's wrong for someone to get up and say, tell us what to do, because you know what to do. And you know that across the country there are people like you who are ready to act. And they don't need no leader telling them what to do, because we're all leaders.
If Jerry Rubin and Abby Hoffman were hoping to inspire revolution, they were misjudging what was happening. So were the Americans who saw them as treasonous conspirators. This would not be a revolution in the traditional political sense, one that could be stopped by arresting its, quote, leaders. This revolution was even more frightening because it was personal. Here is a person who few Americans could have imagined at the start of the decade. A person with no reverence for traditional concepts of sexual restraint, gender role, marriage, nuclear family, civil and religious authority. The Youth Rebellion shocked traditional America not only because such ideas had become possible, but because so many individuals had chosen to live by them. The Youth Rebellion had forged an environment of unrestrained freedom, and there seemed to be no end in sight.
The idea of freedom, then, was total freedom. There was no sense that freedom is the responsible use of form or the mastery of form at all. Freedom was break out of all constraints, which of course is an illusion, an impossibility. But at that time, people were really trying to do that, and they would light any match to their tails to take off. And a lot of the excess was this desperate attempt to finally get beyond all limitations. And it in fact, got people into some scary spaces. It got people into some very violent and negative spaces.
What's a speed freak?
Those things are too mean.
Has a speed freak ever come to live with you?
Yes.
How did he behave? How did you know he was a speed freak?
God, how skinny he was.
Do you turn on?
I smoke grass.
Do you?
Uh-huh.
What's it like?
If you have any grass, I'll show you. I'll eat it.
Do you eat it?
I eat it and smoke it.
Which do you prefer?
Eating it.
What do you think happens when the police find out that people smoke grass?
They get busted. So, would they bust me if they found out I smoked grass?
I don't know. What do you think? Do they bust children?
No. They're little. They're too little.
A lot of people got together and made love and had babies, and then said, well, let's go off and do it with another person. And there's that woman with her babies, and she's got babies from this guy and babies from that guy, and the kids are the ones that suffered. And I think the women that had to raise the children suffered a lot.
Open sex, unusual drugs of 3-day hallucination trips, some unbelievable experiences it was so bizarre that nothing was unusual. Whatever happens was a cliche that was a part of the lifestyle. Anything went. There was nothing shocking anymore, and it wasn't cool to be angry or violent. We were now experiencing a new love scene, you know. If you were hurt, you had to hold it in, more or less. Things weren't really resolved that correctly, but finally you just split if you couldn't cope.
God, this is a horrible story, but I was staying at this house, just crashed on the floor, right? And for a week, and somebody was looking for this woman, and they couldn't find her. And I opened the closet door, and she was inside the closet, and she was totally freaked out. And it took a year for her to get her life back together.
Where are you taking me? Where am I?
Right around here to the desk. You're in the hospital.
Who are you? Hello, I'm a nurse. What's your name? Your hands are cold. What's your name? Joan. Joan. I'm a nurse. Gus? I don't want to be here. Where am
The death of Jimi Hendrix, of Brian Jones, of my friend, dear friend, Mama Cass, who is probably the reason that I'm sitting here talking to you now. The death of Janis Joplin, the death of Jim Morrison, of Tim Buckley, of, it shakes you to your core, because there, but for the grace of God, go I. It's a very fragile life, and they lost the grasp of the silver thread that connected them to humanity. And I don't see them as victims of society, I see them as victims of themselves.
This concert, Altamont, would go down in history not for its music, but for the brutal beatings and a murder witnessed by thousands. Altamont symbolized the dark extremes that the Cultural Revolution had unleashed.
The idea was the Stones had been on tour, and they'd made a lot of money, and making money is immoral. They owed this to us. And of course, what it turned out is we turned our lives over to the Hells Angels. We spent the afternoon taking 14-ounce cans of beer, full, lofting them into the crowd. And of course, the poor stoned hippies are sitting there and hitting the head with a beer can. They'd be knocked unconscious. And this was and this didn't bother anybody. You just laughed when you saw it happen to somebody. Didn't bother anybody. I was there. I was standing right at the stage for a while and watched the Hells Angels beat up members of the Jefferson Airplane. It was a very, to put it mildly, a very strange experience to be with several 100,000 people who were all stoned out of their mind. There was hardly a person who was straight there.
The excesses were because freedom takes responsibility. And there were all types of people who grew up in the 50s that just didn't have it, didn't have the stability to, when they got total freedom, they couldn't take the responsibility, and they couldn't channel it in a certain way in which they could grow and develop. Instead, they said, this is a big party. Let's get high and get laid. And the result was those types of people, which many people think was the counterculture, it was much deeper than that. Those types of people, they crashed. They eventually crashed. And they turned into casualties of the revolution.
This is the concert that most Americans remember as the ultimate countercultural event. To this day, the phrase Woodstock Nation evokes visions of indulgent but peaceful, loving hippies. These kids may look like hippies, but most are not. They are mainstream American kids. What made Woodstock one of the milestones of the 60s is that it marked the end of the counterculture. Death by absorption into middle-class American life. The counterculture rebels may have wanted to create a life free of all restraints. That didn't happen. What they did do was shatter the traditional roles and rules of 1950s American culture.
We're going to have a meeting here to decide on ways to improve the way things run around the house. Okay, who wants to start? Anything?
Whenever we try to have a family, talk like this or something, you go rampaging on and on and on. And you try to get your point across, and there's no one can get in a word edgewise. I'd like to go out in this so-called world and find out, and then see if I accept what you said.
Oh, I totally agree.
Like our grandparents are over here now, and they are very Republican, conservative people, and you are on pretty much the opposite side they are. And I think I get biased by you people.
Because you only been brought up with one viewpoint.
Right, and if I was living with Grandma, Grandpa, and you two, then I think I'd have
Maybe the youth rebellion didn't get what it wanted, but perhaps this generation and America got what it needed.